I know this might annoy many fans of the game, but I have to address my main issue with the 2024 psychological horror game Mouthwashing. While playing, I found myself disappointed once again by yet another video game's portrayal of female representation. Anya is the nurse on the spaceship called the Tulsar. Note that she's not a doctor nor medic, making her role distinctly female-coded, and is the only woman among the crew of 4. It's important to point out that she's a fictional character, a gendered construct created by the developer. However, in this essay I want to address why Mouthwashing let down its female players and fell back onto gendered violence. That said, I don't believe that all of her characterization was bad. For instance, I really enjoyed her small monologue about the dead pixel in the crew's simulated sky screen. It was a thoughtful and well-written moment. Note that I'm going to be speaking in this essay as though the viewer has played the game, so if you haven't played this game, perhaps read a synopsis or watch gameplay footage from the many YouTubers who have played this game. A good question to ask is the grape in this game necessary? For female players, these scenes serve as a stark reminder to women of our perceived place in society. Grape is a gendered crime when looking at statistics of perpetration to victim ratio. Across nearly all forms of media, women are confronted with the possibility of being graped or essayed, a reality that is exhausting in ways that men will never fully understand. It's a constant threat to our bodily autonomy and overall well-being, whether we're at work, at home, or walking down the street. To encounter this same reality in video games is lazy writing, stripping us of even the smallest escape. When men play these games, they're presented with a troubling narrative, women as a group destined to be marginalized and assaulted. For players who don't experience this reality in their daily lives, it's easy to become desensitized to the deeper implications. Meanwhile, for the marginalized group that faces this reality nearly every day, it's a harsh reminder of their position in patriarchy. This stems from a broader lack of meaningful female representation in video games, especially in violent ones. SA is generally treated as another throwaway act of violence, a lazy trope that is almost always committed by men against women or other men. It's cliché, tired, and frankly boring to witness. Mouthwashing uses grape as a cheap suspense tactic or a shocking plot twist, the latter only working if you can't fathom what it's like to be the only woman in a male-dominated environment. Making Anya a victim is an easy surface-level way to evoke audience sympathy without actually exploring her character or the gravity of what happened to her. There is no real examination of her pain or emotions. She's reduced to a sad, non-playable character. The grape also serves to quickly cast Jimmy as the villain. While Jimmy is despicable for many reasons, his treatment of the crew, for example, being unforgivable, the assault on Anya introduces a deeply layered gender to his actions. Its impact lingers, especially because of the pregnancy, which amplifies the trauma and its consequences. What Jimmy does to her is targeted and specific because she is a woman, the only woman. I came across an analysis where a YouTuber suggested that the developer did not need to explicitly state that Anya was raped, arguing that players should infer what happened. But why? It's vital to be clear about the gendered violence women face. Anya herself doesn't need to explicitly say that she was raped, but the writers absolutely should. SA statistics are alarmingly high across the globe. It is a topic that demands clarity. Our society needs to confront what rape is and recognize the devastating impact it has on those who experience it. Anya isn't even in the game as much as the other characters. Across all forms of fictional media, I've noted a severe lack of representation of what women and other SA survivors go through after the quote-unquote incident. In Mouthwashing, the game even blurs her out after she unalives herself, reinforcing that cheap suspense tactic. Her pain is shown to us, and then she is gone. The game doesn't even touch on abortion, which is another issue entirely. The absence of abortion representation in mass media is a topic that deserves its own discussion, and maybe one day I'll dive into it in a separate video. The trauma of SA is used as a plot device to drive Jimmy's narrative forward, not Anya's. She is the one acted upon while he is the actor. We play as him, not her, and that profoundly affects how we perceive the characters in the game. In this case, we are the rapist. We are the bad guy. But the game limits us to only Jimmy and sometimes Curly's point of view. When we discuss the game with others, we can only speak through the experiences of Jimmy and Curly, further reinforcing this skewed perspective. On that point, why do the game developers want us to play as a grapist? The simplest answer is that they find it easier to identify with a perpetrator of violence than with a survivor. This in of itself is deeply troubling and should disgust any player engaging with this game. By forcing the player into the role of the aggressor, the game implicitly normalizes SV, framing it as just another mechanic rather than a horrific crime. It denies the players the opportunity to engage with the perspective of the victim, erasing their trauma and instead centering the experience on the abuser. This not only reflects a disturbing lack of empathy from the developers, but also contributes to the broader cultural desensitization of violence against women in the media. Instead of challenging these harmful narratives, the game perpetrates them, reinforcing the idea that SV is inevitable, unchangeable, and even playable. The question isn't just why we are being asked to play as a rapist, it's why the developers see this as an acceptable or compelling experience in the first place. Curly is positioned as a foil to Jimmy, which plays a major role in the game's narrative. While Jimmy is undeniably a disgusting human being, Curly is framed as the quote-unquote good guy by contrast. He listens to Anya and takes her seriously, or at least appears to. Yet Curly does nothing to help Anya after she confides in him about the forced pregnancy. It reminds me of a feminist who once said, "In patriarchy, women aren't the opposing team, they're the ball that men play with." And this dynamic feels painfully relevant here. Curly never confronts Jimmy, and he's just a pathetic man who is complicit in the violence against Anya, yet Curly is still the better man, while Anya is simply a victim who is made powerless by the game's narrative and writing. While Anya talks to Curly with her big, sad eyes and her eyebrows that are perpetually drawn to make her look apprehensive, she reveals that she's hidden the only gun on board, a weapon she cannot even use. At this moment, I felt like the game was intentionally disempowering her. Not only was she raped, but now the writers denied her the ability to defend herself, let alone seek revenge on her rapist. It's important to remember that this entire story was scripted. None of this is real. The developers chose to write her as a victim of violation. They chose to strip her of any agency or ability to fight back. These decisions were not accidental. Instead, Anya is the perfect patriarchal woman, one who cannot confront the man who committed violence against her and will instead destroy herself to escape the pain. I believe that is why men who enjoy this game like her so much. Take responsibility. What does that phrase even mean? By the end of the game, these words are nothing more than flashing text on the screen. They feel hollow and devoid of meaning because realistically, within the context of the game, how can responsibility truly be taken? What can Jimmy possibly do to redeem himself? There is no feasible way to rectify the situation or hold Jimmy accountable for the crimes he's committed against the crew. After all, they're stranded in the middle of space. This feels less like a profound statement and more like a glaring plot hole in the writing. The story in Mouthwashing relies on the disempowerment and victimization of a woman, reducing her to a plot device in a narrative designed to center male experiences. By portraying Anya as disposable, the game perpetrates a harmful trope often seen in media: women's suffering existing solely to advance a male-driven story. The game's message to women, particularly survivors of SA like Anya, is profoundly damaging. It suggests that speaking up, even to those who are supposedly there to protect and support you, is futile. Instead, the game normalizes the idea that SV is an unchangeable part of life, offering women no hope for justice or healing. Anya's trauma is deliberately silenced and left unexplored, not to provoke critical reflection, but to reinforce a male narrative that erases her agency and humanity. This dismissal of her experience underscores how the game trivializes women's pain, perpetuating the systematic disregard for female voices in storytelling. There is too much violence against women, and too many women never see justice for the crimes that are committed against their body and their rights. Video games, especially ones that are overwhelmingly developed and created for and by men, are not equipped to deal with the rape and essay of women. This game is set in space on a cargo ship which has cryogenic pods, yet the creators could not fathom a crew without gender roles. A good example of media that erases traditional gender roles is Alien, and its video game counterpart, Alien Isolation. These stories focus on the core drama rather than allowing patriarchal dynamics to encroach upon the experience for female players. Anya didn't need to be a perfectly written character. She could have had flaws, be incompetent or even clueless, but making her so utterly vulnerable and shattered as a human being was a terrible choice by the writers. It's a haunting reminder to women that you are never truly safe and that your pain often exists merely to serve as a filler for a man's larger story. Game developers need to take responsibility and make sure that they correctly give time and space to victims of SA, creating a safe environment where these crimes and violations are not seen as normal or accepted, and also not something to be smothered in confusion and grey areas that can mislead a player or viewer. When it comes to topics like rape and SV, when something isn't spoken about explicitly, it cannot be fully thought of, and when something isn't widely thought of, it becomes nearly impossible to articulate. Even now, I'm forced to censor myself just to ensure that this video can be posted without being flagged or age restricted. That is what removing critical thinking around a harmful and pervasive topic looks like. This censorship does not protect victims, it protects perpetrators. The issue with female representation in video games doesn't start or end with mouthwashing. It's a widespread problem across many games. The GTA series, for example, comes to mind as one of the most glaring examples. It's so overtly sexist at this point that it's almost become low-hanging fruit. All media shapes our thoughts and perceptions, and that includes video games. None of us are immune to its influence. If you'd like to see more feminist critiques of popular media, don't forget to subscribe. Like and share this with friends who might find this interesting. I'm currently working to build a channel that delves into feminism, especially in a time where the online space is flooded with red pill rhetoric and with Trump serving as president of the USA for the second time. Thank you for watching. I love video games and I hate the patriarchy.